Welcome, we'll start with chapter 5 for political science class 10th. In this chapter, we'll talk about the various popular struggles and movements. The first topic that we would cover is the Nepal's right or Nepal's movement. Now, Nepal was one of the countries that faced the third wave of freedom. Now, under the third wave countries, when we talk about, we have the countries who had a search for democracy from a kind of monarchy or a dictatorship that they've witnessed, and this was mainly during the period of post 1974. So during 1974 to 1990s, you had the third phase, the third wave countries that were popular, and Nepal is one of the good examples of it. Now what initially happened was, initially there was the head of the state or the monarch that was ruling, and it was in the name of King Birendra. And this King Birendra was killed in one of the royal massacres in 2001. After that, King Gyanendra came to power, but he was not willing to accept the democratic rule in the state of, in the country of Nepal. What happened was, there was a kind of dismissal of the parliament that took place, and the prime minister was dismissed. Finally, there were major political parties that formed SPA, that was 7-party alliance, where 7 of the major parties came together, and there was a kind of 4-day strike in Kathmandu, following which there was a kind of strike that was led by basically the Nepalese Communist Party. And under this Nepalese Communist Party, the idea was a kind of Maoist inflow, where this was under the leadership of Mao of China, and the idea was to bring in people or to overthrow government by armed rebellion. So after an armed rebellion, you can definitely overthrow a government, and that was the sole basic idea that they were trying to follow. Finally, this Maoist insurgency led to a kind of democratic movement in Nepal, and you had democracy that was resumed. And on 24th April 2006, Giriraj Prasad Koirala became the new prime minister for the interim government that was held, and this was known as the Nepal's second movement for democracy. Now similar to this, you had a kind of Bolivian water wars that took place. Now Bolivia is an interesting country lying in Latin America. So when we talk about Latin America, it includes, so you have the North Americas, the Central America and the South America. So both the Central and the South America together are known as Latin America. And under this you had Bolivia. Bolivia is basically a landlocked country, and since it's a landlocked country, it do not have its own water resources. Most of the water that was available in this country was through the government supplies, and one day government decided to basically follow this or forward this to a kind of MNC or a private company. As a result, what happened here was, there was a sudden price rise. Following the price rise, the people's movement started, and there was a 4-day strike that was led by the community leaders and the local leaders there. The MNC contract was ultimately cancelled, and water supply was restored by the government at the older rates, which were the nominal rates. Now whenever we talk about these issues, there comes an issue of a popular struggle. Now this popular struggle could be in two forms. It could be a issue based or a kind of general revolution. This general would also be known as a kind of generic idea. Now when we talk about issue based, I can say Narda Bachao Andolan is one of the issue based popular struggle, where we are only focusing about the building of dam or raising the level of waters for the Narmada river. And the construction of dam, increasing the height of the dam. So that's specifically to the Narmada river and the dam project on the Narmada river. Then similarly you have anti-liquor movement, that's again a kind of issue based movement. When we talk about a general or a generic movement, it would be a kind of women movement or a women empowerment drive. So that would be a kind of general movement. So popular struggles could be finally or broadly classified as issue based movements or general or generic movements. Now whenever you have a popular struggle, what happens is, under a conflict you have two groups, one who is in power and the other who is trying to attain the power. So there is a conflict between one who is existingly in power and the other who is trying to attain power. So the one who is in power is dominating the scene right now, but this party is trying to have a kind of balance or trying to bring themselves up to the level where you can say the party who is in power is dominant. So this requires a kind of mass mobilization. So mass mobilization becomes very, very important, and for this mass mobilization definitely there would be people's participation or the participation of the common man, without which you cannot have a kind of active mass mobilization that could be seen. Again, this mass participation could be seen in the competitive politics, and this influences the election procedure and the government that is being formed. Again, there are indirect participations that are seen. These are from the organizations who are promoting the group, who are acting together without forming a kind of organizations. But again, you have pressure groups. Now there are definite advantages and disadvantages of pressure groups. When we talk about pressure groups, these are small groups who are not involved directly into the politics, but they are trying to influence the government policies or the government decisions. So Narmada Bachao Andolan is a kind of pressure group under Meda Patkar, which is trying to restrict the height of the dam that is being built on Narmada. So that's a kind of pressure group that is coming into action with a common objective. So all the people who are working for that pressure group would have a common objective or common ideology in mind. Now these influence politics rather than the direct participation in a competition. So whenever you have a kind of pressure groups, that would affect the politics at a deeper level as compared to direct participation. A good example is from Indonesia, where nearly 15,000 landless farmers from the West Java region protested that if they are not given any land, they would not vote, and they were asked to boycott the first direct presidential elections that were held, and they said that unless and until we are given the lands, we would not give vote to any of the presidential candidate, whoever is contesting the election. So that's a kind of involvement or a kind of pressure group that deepens its root. Now again, when you talk about pressure groups, there are certain interest groups that come into power. These interest groups could be sectional, that means they are favoring a particular section of the society. So let's say they are favoring a particular religion, a particular minority group, or a particular ethnic or cultural group. Now when they are favoring that interest group, one good aspect would be definitely that interest group would have an opportunity to rise or do better. But on the other hand, there would be another drawback that would be witnessed, and that drawback would be that interest group could be overpowered, and it could affect the functioning of others in the society. So public interest groups or promotional groups are again important. A good example is the FEDECOR group in Bolivia, which worked for the water issues and focused on a kind of collective interest of the group behavior to work around the MNC that was raising the prices of the water in Bolivia. Similarly, you have BEMSEF, that is Backward and Minority Communities Employee Federation. Now this is an federation that is made up of government employees and that discriminates or that have a kind of momentum against the caste discrimination that occurs. Now there are various movement groups that we already talked about. So movement groups could be issue specific or general or generic movement groups. Then how these pressure groups influence the politics. The first is they provide support and sympathy to a specific group of people. So they have a kind of common goal that they are working for. They help in organizing the strikes and the protest activities. So workers organizations, trade unions, employee associations are good examples for those. The next is they often have or they kind of employ professional lobbyists, and when they are employing professional lobbyists, it is a kind of expensive advertisement they are doing, and this expensive advertisement could be met by a kind of section of group, but that could affect the functioning of other official bodies in the government because those are not spending as much as this specific interest group or a political group is. Again, they have certain political ideologies or political positions over major issues that could affect the functioning of the government. A good example is the Assam Gan Parishad, that was a Assam movement led by the students against foreigners who came there. Similarly, you have DMK and AIADMK in Tamil Nadu, that is based on the social reform movements of 90s, 30s and 40s. The relation between parties and the political groups cannot be separated and cannot be direct in some cases. They have to work with negotiation. So, some of the major drawbacks of the pressure group is it affects the functioning of the democracy because a specific group would have a kind of dominant position, and sometimes there is small public support, but since they have that small pressure group has lot of money, they can hijack the realities and bring a kind of change in the public opinion. The next is the benefits of pressure group. Pressure group is important because it affects the functioning of the rich and the powerful. So, because of the pressure group, the small rich and powerful group that is trying to dominate the scenario could be countered by the pressure group who is working around that small rich and powerful group. Again, it is beneficial because it talks about the functioning and achieving dominance over the society. The idea is to hear about the different sections of the society and what the people are actually looking for, their own interest. A good example again is the Green Belt movement in Kenya. Now, this was led by leader Wangari Maathai, and he basically talked about planting around 30 million trees in Kenya. The idea was government officials in the Kenya at that time were corrupt. There was lot of deforestation activities that was going on, and the trees were sold in the market. As a result, a huge amount of region was witnessing deforestation and cutting of the trees. Under the leadership of Wangari Maathai, the idea was to encourage the local communities to attack another's land, to attack the another over the land. So, that issue was taken over by Wangari, and he talked that if we are attacking another's land for the sake of getting dominance, as that was led by the President Arap Moi during that time, this could further deteriorate the situation. So, the idea was, even if we are retaining the power, the communities are busy fighting over the land, this issue could not be resolved, and the opportunity should be taken by the leadership or by the common people rather than crisscrossing themselves or attacking themselves. So, that was one of the good examples where you had a numerous plantation of trees that was witnessed in Kenya. So, this is something, a kind of brief intro about the pressure groups and the struggles or the movements that took place across the various parts of the nation and the world. With this, we cover the 5th chapter. We will be talking about more lectures in the upcoming classes. So, stay tuned. Have a very good day ahead.